right, so we are going to begin. This is the Nothing Without Us interview. I am Kat Gordon, and here with me always is Talia, the Brain Johnson. And today we get the pleasure of interviewing Dorothy Palmer, one of our amazing authors for the anthology. We're so excited to meet you, Dorothy. Would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I spent most of my life as a teacher and as a unionist hiding my disability because I walked unassisted until my 50s. And in my 50s, I needed a crutch. And then at the end of my 50s, I needed a walker. But most of my life, I spent trying to deny being disabled. And it's only in the last 10 years or so when I've fully embraced it.
Interesting. I find that fascinating. Can you just tell us why you denied it?
I denied it for a whole number of reasons that are all tangled together. I'm adopted, and my parents always made it very clear to me that that made me damaged, that I was already a charity case, already inferior, that I would be lucky to be loved by anybody. And the idea of then admitting that I was damaged in a second way, which is the way I saw it as a child, was just completely an anathema to me. I could not do that. So I put vast amounts of time and energy into trying not to limp, into trying to be normal, into trying to wear normal shoes, because I felt like my ability to be accepted in my family, to be accepted as a girl in the 1950s and 60s, meant that I had to pretend to be normal.
Interesting. And how do you feel now that you've accepted yourself?
I feel vastly relieved, but I also feel very frightened.
Oh, explain.
Yeah, I'm relieved because I've discovered this enormous disability community, thanks to online. I'm very, very lucky to have sort of come out of the disabled closet at a time when disabled Twitter was there and waiting for me. You know, that was really something wonderful. But I'm also very frightened because I think in the rise of right-wing nationalism in general, in the rise of Trump, in the attacks on Medicare that are duplicated not just in the States where disabled people are being called pre-existing conditions.
Right.
We're seeing that with Doug Ford. We're seeing that right around the world in a way that I think is extremely frightening. You know, Nazis believe that we are life unworthy of life. And to see any rise of right-wing nationalism endangers us in a way that I think should make us all frightened.
And I mean, that's a really valid point. How do you feel the rise of the disabled community? Like, people are really starting to band together. And on Twitter in the US, they have something called Crip the Vote. So do things, movements like that, and communities like even our little author community that we're starting to grow and have recognition of ourselves as artists, does that give you hope for the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a union activist from way back. I was branch president during the Harris years, and I helped lead a lot of the walkouts and strikes and the big strike at Queen's Park. And I think it will take mass action, like ADAPT in the States. That's how they got the ADA there. I think we will need eventually to do mass action here. But it starts with the community building and fundraising community raising and consciousness raising that makes that eventually possible. So yes, it's very hopeful.
I mean, that's great. I mean, you really do have the experience. So I love how you identify that there's a problem, but you also see that there is still hope out there. I'm going to hand the next question over to Talia for you.
Okay.
What inspired you to submit to Nothing Without Us, or as we refer to it in our short form, NWU?
It sounds like a university, doesn't it? That's funny. NWU. Northwestern University or something. Yeah. I really liked your pitch. I loved the idea that it was a story about a disabled protagonist that didn't fit the usual stereotypes, right? She's not a charity case. She doesn't die. She isn't grateful. You know, all of the kinds of stereotypes. She certainly doesn't want to cure. You know, all of those stereotypes are broken in that story. So I thought it was a really good fit for the pitch that you made for the anthology, and I was delighted to be accepted into it.
We found your story. There was so much in it. I read it like 3 times. It felt like a novelette almost, you know. I love the constant meanwhile, but you know, the scenes kept changing. I could almost envision it like a play, you know, with different stages. Now this is happening. One of the things, your character is also an activist. And so the activism comes through in your story, and the protagonist goes through some challenges as an activist, as we see. I'm not going to say, because spoilers, you got to buy the book. But for yourself, what were some of your challenges as an activist, as a disabled activist?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll start with Nellie Wolf and not giving away any spoilers. She's an improviser. I was a drama teacher and an improv coach and an improviser. And her biggest struggle, I think, as an activist is to be taken seriously, to be seen with her crutch, but also to be seen beyond her crutch. And I think that's very much the way it is for me now that I have a walker and I'm hyper visible.
Right.
My current activism in the literary community is to be fighting for accessible venues for readings and festivals and retreats. And right at this moment, the situation is pretty dire. I would guess about 95% of readings are inaccessible for one reason or another, often steps, often stairs down to a bathroom, that kind of thing. And the biggest goal, or one of the biggest barriers for me as a disabled writer and activist in the literary community is trying to get people to understand I'm not just active for myself.
Right, yes.
That it isn't just about me getting to one venue or one reading. It's about disabled attendees. It's about equity. It's about representation. It's about the fact that disabled people are somewhere in the neighborhood of 24% of the population and need to be represented in CanLit.
Yeah, I can really feel what you're saying.
Right, and asking for, I think Leg just hit us there. One of the challenges around that is so often having to ask for accommodations when they ought to be provided from the start, such as an accessible venue, such as ASL interpretation, etc. And that's not even getting into accessibility of literature for visually impaired and blind folk.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Accessibility is a much wider question than simply no stairs. I mean, that's a place for a lot of abled people to start because that's something they can physically see. And when you start to branch out and you talk about things, for example, that the neurodiversity community might need, as in a quiet space, or when you talk about large print, or when you talk about CART, you know, obviously when you're actively arguing for all of those things, it, I think, can get a little overwhelming for some organizers because they see it as hugely expensive, which isn't always true, but they see it that way.
Right.
They see it as burdens and inconveniences, which is, of course, what the culture tells them to see us as. And they see it as incidental, as in if they can make me satisfied, then the problem will go away and they can go right back to doing what they've always done before. So it really is a long-term education to help the vastly abled world of CanLit understand that it requires a culture change, not just an incident change, but a culture to see accessibility as something that begins in the planning stage, and that they consult actually disabled people to create an accessible venue before it even gets organized or advertised. It's got to go right back to the planning stage.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I really felt when you were saying that you weren't bringing these things up for yourself, but for everybody who falls into our disability umbrella, for lack of a better term. I've often felt like I was the crypt disturber.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I just kept saying, oh, and about this, and oh, and about
Yeah.
But it's important that we speak up. At the CanCon conference last year, I brought up the issue of consent in relation to mobility devices. You know how some people feel they could push us or move our devices, or, oh, can I just move this out of the way? Well, actually, sometimes they don't even ask. They just start grabbing things. And the CanCon organizers actually integrated that as part of their code of conduct. So it is important that we speak out there. Unfortunately, we're often the ones who start the conversation.
Yes.
You know, that's, yeah. So I personally would love to see that progress.
Yeah.
Talia, I think I took your question. Sorry. I got so enthusiastic.
It flows. That's the important thing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
With this story, what was important for you to get across to readers about your protagonist, the main character?
I think what Nellie stands for to me is that she leads an authentically disabled life. She breaks all kinds of rules. She's on stage, she's visible, she's a political activist, she, goes to demonstrations, she gets arrested. She is in no way a housebound stereotype of someone who isn't active in the world. She leads an authentically disabled life. But she also doesn't minimize the barriers. She sees them. She's very angry about them. And I think her righteous anger as a disabled person ties really well to her righteous anger at the political scene, and how she wants both of those changed. And all of that feeds into her artwork, because her improv troupe, Kerfuffle, is definitely a lefty improv troupe. And so she's able to integrate all those aspects of her life.
I love Kerfuffle as a name.
Yeah, and this won't spoil anything. I really love the scene with the inaccessibility of subway stations in Toronto. That was, as somebody who grew up in Toronto and is living in Toronto again, and I know Toronto isn't the only place, but I just thought that was a really good thing in that.
Yeah, the story Kerfuffle.
And that it showed how inaccessible.
Go ahead. Oh,
yeah,
yes.
No, that was pretty much done. Yeah, just that the transit is inaccessible often.
Yes. I grew up in Toronto as well, and I go there very infrequently now because exactly that. As a senior and as a disabled senior, I see the overlap of my two communities, and my car is my accessibility device. I drive myself somewhere. I can walk maybe half a block with my walker, or I need to pull my transport chair out of the back and have a friend push me. But obviously, the closer I can get to somewhere, parking-wise, is extremely important. And I think a lot of seniors are being driven out of inner cities like Toronto simply because the subways are inaccessible and they can't find. So it's Nellie's struggle with that subway definitely reflects my years of struggle with that subway. I also wanted to add that Nellie's story actually comes from a larger work, a novel still in progress called Kerfuffle, which is about all 5 of the improv troupe members. And her story I wrote first, and it sort of expanded into this idea of looking at the Toronto G20 protests from all 5 of them. So I'm hoping down the long run we'll see more of Nellie.
I'm so buying that book. I'm buying that one.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I saw on Facebook land was you were talking about disability panels.
Mm-hmm.
And that really hit me. I've had an experience where I was at a disability panel. I was the only disabled person on the panel. And I would like for you to share a little bit about your experiences with disability panels. What are the things that have struck you about them?
It's a very conflicting thing. On one hand, I really want to see them. On the other hand, I also want to get past them as quickly as possible so that we can start asking disabled writers about craft and all of the other questions that we ask. But at the same time, I realize we are stuck right now asking disabled writers about the lack of representation and about accessibility. So I'm happy to talk about those things. The first disability panel I was on, I believe, was probably the first in the country in 2016 at the Festival of Literary Diversity. I was interviewed by both J.L. Richardson and Amanda Leduc, who is also disabled, about my novel, my first novel, which is When Fenelon Falls, and it has a disabled protagonist in it. And those questions were about accessibility and about craft. So I think that was the first one. I've been on about 5 since, sometimes with 3 or 4 other different disabled writers, sometimes as the only disabled writer talking about diversity. The sort of sad part of that is that I was invited to do this really cool panel. The future is disabled at AWP, and for accessibility reasons, get scooters reserved there was successful in the end, and they are going to be able to reserve scooters at AWP, which was one of the main reasons I couldn't go there. It was this ludicrous notion that I would have to come an hour before the conference started, run to be first in line because you couldn't reserve a scooter to get a scooter for the day. I would have had to have gone back to the hotel. So eventually they figured this out, and now scooters are going to be reserved, which is good. But there were several other problems that I couldn't even get to AWP, the main one being that I couldn't find an accessible hotel room with a roll-in shower.
Right.
I found out I can't use a ordinary bathtub shower because if I fall in it, my insurance doesn't cover me.
Oh my
Because,
goodness.
yeah, because I know I'm supposed to have a walk-in shower.
Okay.
So their thinking is if I use an ordinary shower, I'm assuming the risk.
Oh, I see.
So, you know, getting to the panel, being invited to do a panel is lovely, but getting to it is still an issue.
You have a book coming out this year. What is it? What's it about? Tell us a bit about it.
Okay, that's very exciting for me. It's a memoir. It's specifically a disability memoir. It's called Falling for Myself, and it's going to be published by Woolsack and Wynne this coming fall. I'm in the final stages of edits right now, and it basically looks at my, I hate the word journey, but I'll use it, looks at my journey from being someone who really suffered from internalized ableism, really hid so many things, how eventually, slowly, drawing on other activisms, I came out of the disabled closet as an older woman.
And it's just such a pleasure to talk to you. And can we just close with where we can find your books? Nathan will probably post the link as well. Where can we find your works?
Okay, my novel When Fenelon Falls was published by Coach House. That's available either through Coach House or online. It was published in 2010, but is still current. It's out there somewhere. I've had a lot of articles ever since, so I would suggest Googling me. Word gathering, little fiction. Just Google it; it'll all come up.
Okay.
A really, really important article, I think, in All Lit Up recently, talking about the inaccessibility of independent bookstores. That came out a year ago. It's called When Buildings Do the Dirty Work, Candlelit Hands Aren't Clean.
Oh.
Yeah,
Good.
for those who haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I read it when it was shared around recently, and it's so true.
Oh, wow.
And
I'm going to read that.
Yeah. So, and then this is my second book coming out in the fall, Falling for Myself with Woolsack and Win, and I'm looking forward to that immensely.
Okay, well, that's just great. You're awesome. We love you already. I feel like I've known you for a long time already.
I know, it's lovely, and I'm thrilled to meet both of you, and thank you so much for this anthology. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
And thank you for blessing it with your story, because we loved it.
yes, thank you. And thank you for the interview.